We're going to be talking about the challenges and changes of communicating complex economic, corporate, and financial news and concepts to a number of audiences over a number of new media and techniques and technologies. And we have three people on this panel who are extremely well equipped to talk about this. I'll make some introductions, we'll have a little chat here, and hopefully we'll be able to get some questions from you or some thoughts from you as well later on. So to my left, Lucy Marcus, who so kindly put this panel together and selected the participants. She is a number of things, and if you read her bio, you'll know that she distinguishes herself in many roles, not least as a mother. I've met her son, he's amazing. But she is a fierce boardroom reformer. She has a project syndicate column about governance and boards, and she is extremely active on across social platforms. And I think she does a very crucial thing of being at the same time a force for change, but also a force for communicating exactly the sort of stuff we'll be talking about today. Michael Steen, further to my left, is the head of media relations for the European Central Bank. I first came to know him as a formidable counterpart covering the European Central Bank for the Financial Times, and we often joke that he crossed over to the dark side, but he has been shaking things up, and communicating the business of monetary policy is not easy, let alone when you do it for a whole currency union in times like these, so we'll be hearing more about that. And to my right is Alexandra Foederl-Schmid, and she is another distinguished woman in journalism. There aren't that many of them around. She's editor-in-chief of the major Austrian newspaper Der Standard, and we've just been talking about how difficult it is to communicate the financial news stories to a general audience. How do you go about presenting them, and how do you allocate space to them, for example, in a daily newspaper as well as online? My name is Martina Steves. I am the Wall Street Journal's Africa business correspondent based in Nairobi. Before that, I had the less enviable task of being Eurozone correspondent for the Wall Street Journal based in Brussels, so I staged a very dramatic escape from that. And part of my work in Africa is writing about business and economics and finance, stuff that's often a tough sell for general audiences, but doing it about Africa, which is in and of itself a tough sell for general audiences in the West. So hopefully that's a perspective I can bring into this discussion. I think I'd love to start with just the premise of why we're having this panel today. And I think the premise is that there has never been a time when business news, financial news, and economic news are more complex, but also the full relevance that they have to our audience's lives, to our readers' lives, which is the lives of normal people, has never been clearer. We have seen the Eurozone crisis, and frankly, since the global financial crisis, the previous habit of skipping over the pink pages or not reading the back half of The Economist or not even clicking on financial news on a website has really become ever less so. Ever more people are reading about financial news because of the financial crises that Western economies went through, but also because of issues such as Lucy brought up a great example that you can read more about in her column, like the Panama Papers. God, if you talk to people about tax secrecy some years ago, they'd fall asleep, and this is absolutely no longer the case. So just the first thing I'd love to talk to the panelists about and get their thoughts on is, in their line of business, how is this new complex environment manifesting itself? How do you perceive it, and how does it impact your work and what you do? Lucy, I'd love to start with you, if that's okay.
I start again. So to me, there's a spectrum of people who are responsible for getting the news across. To me, it starts with Michael and his work, where he's at the coalface. He's representing the institution that's taking decisions, and also acts in some ways as a lightning rod for everybody and anybody who has a problem with the state of the economy in a way. I mean, the ECB is a huge institution, and in these complex times, it's ever more important to be understood. And one of the reasons that I admire Michael, you don't have to be embarrassed, but is that also he does it with great aplomb. That actually, he recognizes that there's going to be, people coming at him in all kinds of ways. And I've always found him to be incredibly responsive and open, even if the discussion is critical. And then you get to the absolute news reporting, getting the facts across in ways that people can understand them. So meeting people where they are and finding a way to tie it in so that people understand why these economic issues and business issues are relevant to them and how it impacts them directly. And my work then is, I write opinion columns. So I don't necessarily consider myself a journalist of sorts, more gobby and opinionated and free of having to seem neutral, because I'm not neutral. And the work that I do is very much informed by sitting on the boards of companies and running companies and meeting people and all these things. And so for me, what I try very hard to do when I'm writing is not use specialized language, or my column for Project Syndicate gets translated into, I think, 13 languages. It goes around the world. And so I try very hard to use universal examples to talk about things that people can relate to, and draw in an understanding of the politics, the ethics, because my area is ethics and business and corporate governance and boards, and I've written a lot about FIFA, as you can imagine, and about banking and about responsibility, and in some ways, what I write is also a reminder to myself as somebody who sits on a large international board, to remind myself when I walk in the room what that means. And so I think that role is more important than ever, because if I can explain along with others, so my opinion is just my opinion, but then with a collection of other people talking about an issue and drawing ideas together, if I'm able to explain that clearly, then I'm doing my job. And the minute I start using complex language and pushing people away, or not relating it to something that they know, I'm actually being very self-indulgent and failing at my job. So I feel like I'm the end of the spectrum that then draws it back around, because hopefully if I'm critical of the ECB, or if I'm writing something that's useful, then it goes back around to the institution, and they do some thinking and one hopes makes changes or reflects, and then it goes back around into a sort of benevolent cycle.
Alexandra, as someone who deals with reporters in the news, but also has to sell something every day to a general audience, how do you see the environment around financial and economic news changing, maybe specifically in Austria, and how does that impact your work or your daily news meetings, etc.?
I have to add some details to my biography. I started 25 years ago working for the Standard, which is the biggest quality press in Austria and in the news website #2 in the country. And I worked for 14 years as a correspondent, mainly based in Berlin and in Brussels. And since 2007, I'm now editor-in-chief and co-publisher. I survived. And well, I have to say that everything has changed a lot in these more than 2 decades, because when I started working in journalism, I had to deal with political issues, chronicle stuff, and I can't remember that in the first years I had to write something dealing with business, financial, economic issues. That changed really dramatically. And I've studied communications, history, and political science. And I also acknowledged, well, I need more knowledge to be able to report on all these complex issues on the economic side. and I studied an MBA extra to be better informed, and I think from my experience, also as an editor-in-chief, as you have mentioned in the beginning in your introduction, economic issues are getting more important and relevant. You mentioned the Euro crisis. Last year, before we all were reporting more extensively about the refugee crisis, there was the Euro crisis. In the first half of the year, I think nothing else was so important in Europe. And now we see the Panama Papers, and I'm sure that not only in Great Britain, we will write more about Brexit in June. So economic issues are becoming really more important. This is my first learning, and the second one is that there are more connections, and it's more and more difficult in our editorial meetings every day to decide, well, where should we put this article? Is it an economic article? Should we put it in this section? Or has it more to do with politics, or with the, should we have a stronger focus on the impact on society? So we spend every day amount of time discussing and negotiating where should we put what in the section and on which pages. And on the other hand, there are surveys, for instance, the Standard & Poor survey, which was published last autumn, which show that on the reader's side, there is a form of financial illiteracy in the United States, in Europe as well, and the last S&P Global Financial Literacy Survey showed that only 57% of the adult Americans have basic knowledge about what are interest rates, what is GDP, and so on. The figures are better for Western Europe, 65%, but in Southern Europe, and this includes Italy, just 28% are able to explain, for instance, what is risk management. And the PISA study, I'm sure you are all familiar with it. Last year they also have included some questions dealing with financial issues, and the figures shows that in 18 of 56 countries of the OECD, that 15-year-old students fails to answer basic economic questions. So we are faced with more media coverage, but on the other hand, we see that readers are not able to follow the news, and I think this makes it more difficult to sell financial issues and EU stories. What we also know from our analytics are normally quite difficult to sell to our readers. And I think that the role of media and journalists has to change. I think what Lucy mentioned is important. We have to explain more and try to find connections, links, to show the surroundings and bring the whole picture. It's like a puzzle work. And Lucy also mentioned it, translation. When I started in Brussels, I really had to learn like vocabularies, the acronyms, because normal citizens are not able to follow when a commissioner or a EU parliamentarian speaks. And I think this is also one of the reasons for the EU crisis. And when you read a document of the ECB, Michael, I think it's the same for normal citizen. It's difficult to follow. And it's, I think, an important task of media to translate in normal language. And interpretation is, I think, the next important step to show what does it mean for me as a reader in my surrounding.
Can I just ask one question?
Yes, sure.
It's fascinating. Do you find that that a story, when you're measuring, that a story gets better play in one section rather than the other? So if you put it in business or if you put it in politics, if you would put the same story in either place, does it one?
Normally, politics sells better because I think the hurdle is not so high for normal readers. We have approach. Wall Street Journal is more focused on financial issues, so I think you have different type of readers. And normally, but during the EU crisis, Greece, I think more people were involved in all these issues and were interested what is going on. And this was a perfect example to show, everything has to do with everything. And what happens in Athens has to do something with us in Vienna. And I think this was a good chance to explain more. And I don't know if you're interested later. I have some examples. Banks are quite important in Austria and their exposure in Eastern Europe. And we also try to find different forms in telling stories, banking scandals, because as you mentioned in the beginning, everything is very complex.
It makes me wonder if it's time for us to rethink the way we do sections.
Maybe, yes.
I mean, that might be one of the things to think about is we categorize news into clear sections, but the world isn't clear anymore. I don't know how.
And it's the same with the EU crisis. So we always have the problem to deal, especially in the paper. Well, we normally create a special page because there are economic ties and chronicle ties and so on. So to combine everything.
Thanks so much. That is definitely fascinating. Michael, never have more people known what the emergency liquidity assistance is. Everyone, especially in this continent, has become a monetary policy expert, which I'm sure is a lot of fun for you. So I'd love to hear about, as in your role, communicating to the media, but also de facto to a broader audience via Twitter that you're very active on, etc.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, and thanks also for the introduction, pointing out that I've crossed over to the dark side. As part of which I should just say at the beginning, I think for compliance reasons that whatever I say today does not necessarily represent the view of my employer, but is my own view. That out of the way, I do think these are incredibly interesting times. And in a way, it's a little bit sad that we find ourselves now in a situation where everyone's really interested in financial news, but in a way for the wrong reason, because we've been through this really grueling crisis. But that being said, there is this much greater interest. And as I say, I think that's positive. As you can probably hear, I'm British. And I think you can quite happily go through the British school system and go to a very good university and end up with a very good degree and not have a clue about some very basic economic concepts, including what is a central bank. And as someone who works at a central bank, one of the challenges, particularly related to the crisis that you feel, is that it's got the word bank in it, which can give the wrong impression. And we see criticism from different corners. When we inaugurated our new building last year, there were some anti-capitalist protesters outside. And okay, there are reasons for that debate, clearly. But part of it is also treating it as a symbol just of capitalism itself, but perhaps ignoring the fact that it's a public institution, which is fairly crucial to the way our societies function. And at the same time, we get a lot of criticism from the right-wing, conservative right-wing end of the spectrum. So that makes for an interesting mix of challenges when you're trying to explain what you're doing. And I think that's where, to pick up on Lucy and Alexandra's point on language and explaining, yes, we do use a lot of acronyms, I'm afraid. Partly for accounting reasons, it turns out that when we have one of these many programs, they do need an individual name. So there are, I'm not going to pretend that a lot of what we put out is highly technical, and some of it really needs to be technical because these are interventions in financial markets. But we have tried, and we are trying also to make sure that we can explain ourselves to people who are less sophisticated. And I'd invite anyone who wants to go to the ECB website. And if you look along the top, there's a new section now called Explainers, where we try and explain in plain language some very basic things like what is a central bank, what our asset purchase program is, and why we're doing things. And we're making more use of techniques like questions and answers, and so on. And that's this is an evolving thing. We've started doing it quite recently, but I do think it's important. And one of the reasons it's important is also looking at the media. And I think if you take a really long view, there was a time, you go back to the 1970s, the Federal Reserve didn't even say what their interest rate was. And there was actually you could have a successful career in a bank as an economist whose job it was to figure out what the effective interest rate was. Fast forward to today, and every major central bank obviously says what its interest rate is, and they will tend to have published minutes of their meetings, which allow the public to see the debate behind it. And an innovation which, small known fact, but I'll boast about it because I can, the ECB introduced was the practice of having a press conference immediately after a meeting on interest rates and monetary policy, which now I'm happy to say other major central banks also do, although none of them do it after every meeting the way we do. And that's important from a public accountability point of view as well.
But no minutes yet.
No, we do minutes as well. We call them accounts, though, because the minutes are secret and more wide. But we publish accounts of the monetary policy part of the discussion. And so if you look at the sort of technical end of the media, those have been very well received. And the FT and the Journal, in fact, tend to write big stories about them and go into them. Again, it's not necessarily something that the ordinary citizen will particularly engage with, but they're there if they want to. And that's the other thing I think is interesting to look at is the changing media landscape. There was a time when we would, as a central bank, talk to the Wall Street Journal, the FT, and the financial papers, particularly in the 19-euro era countries. Or it was fewer back then because we're still growing as a bloc. Or the financial pages of say, Der Standard. But nowadays it's much wider than that. So also in my job as media relations, we get questions from across the spectrum, and we try and. So that means that my team has to be able to explain more to people who are maybe new to it. We find political correspondents writing about us who are perhaps less well versed. So we're talking to a wider. So we're talking as media relations to a much wider audience. As a bank, we would like to try to talk to a wider public audience, and there are some steps there that we're taking. And in this year, we'll be opening a visitor centre at the bank to get the public in and to try and explain what we're doing. And Martina was kind enough to mention our Twitter account. We're fairly active on Twitter. I would say with Twitter, that's probably still for us more where we're probably talking more to the experts because we are fairly. It's a fast-moving environment, and that's more where you're talking to. I mean, I think the reality of Twitter is also that it seems to be more a place for experts than the broadest of publics. We're not on Facebook, and that's where you would maybe see a much wider public. And that's still an open question on what we do in terms of trying to reach out directly. Because one other final thing, just before I stop on this, is I think also for institutions, that, and I don't know if this is wise to say in front of a room full of journalists, but one of the things about the digital revolution is that there is actually much greater opportunity for institutions and organizations to try to speak directly to the public. And of course, I think it's incredibly important that there will always be a role for media, particularly because they're there to hold us to account and to ask difficult questions, and yes, to criticize as well. But there's equally an opportunity for the institution to say, well, look, here's the data, here's the facts, please come and look at it yourselves directly.
Thanks so much. I just wanted to unpick on a few things already mentioned. And one thing actually is something, Alexandra, you mentioned with regards to presentation and making use of technology, but also making use of new publishing tools. And I had a little peek on that page that I hope we'll be able to see from you. I'd really like to talk a little more about the use of data and data visualization, which is becoming extremely important, but also very popular with financial news stories. Suddenly these spreadsheets sing and they make sense. And I'd love to talk a bit about how you use that or you utilize that in your work and communicating with various audiences, as well as if we could just go into a little more into the question of language. I think, Lucy, this is something you've clearly considered a lot, and I'd really like to understand why you think some people may use complex language as an exclusion mechanism for general audiences from this types of news, and with what effect. But shall we start with your page, and maybe you can just tell us a bit about the story, what it's about, and how it was presented and how it was received.
This is a special Longreach feature dealing with the golden age of banks in Eastern Europe. I don't know if you're familiar with the fact that Austrian banks have a big exposure in Eastern Europe, and this is a special Longreach, and this shows the exposure of Austrian banks in the 15 Eastern European country. Austria's #1, Italy is following. And this shows how many Austrian banks have debt in which countries, and you can play also with the graphs and see more and get more information if you click on it. So it's quite interactive with different features, and I think it doesn't make sense because it's in German. This is a really simple form of explaining with drawings what is the current currency loans and what are the problems with it. And we have different graphs introduced in this long read, and this is, for instance, one ad. One Austrian bank has aired in, I think, Romania, trying to convince people to get loans. And these are figures from the National Bank, and so this is one story, one long read story. And another way is a network graph to show how different persons dealing with the what?
It moves.
Yes, it moves, and you have the different persons here. They all have something to do with Austrian politics and are quite famous in Austrian, and they have connections, and it's a scandal around the Austrian telecom firm, Hannes Ametsreiter. He was the CEO, and this is the central figure is the lobbyist Peter Hochegger, and you can click and get more information, and it's moving. So I think for users it's a good way to learn more, and it's a way of gamification news. I think this is a trend we also have to follow. And the third example is it's just a bank scandal in Austria, Hypo-Alpe Adria. If there are some colleagues here from Germany, I think they are familiar with this scandal. And these are our two investigative journalists. They try to explain in a very simple way, within 5 minutes, the whole scandal from the beginning. It's a small film, not more than 5 minutes, and I think these are all examples how it could work to explain more and to try to get readers, users involved, and to get more information in an easier and more convenient way.
And what was the response to it? I mean, did people...
Well, we thought that this explanation story could have had more clicks, to be honest, but the golden age piece dealing with the bank exposure in Eastern Europe was really a click hit. And the network graphs, we do it for several locations. It's really good, and it's worth all the work because it's extra work for the colleagues, and you have to find colleagues who want to work with these special formats. But I think it's necessary to find other ways of storytelling.
That's great.
And I do not have an example with me, but we also try to publish very complex graphs on 2 pages in print. So to cover both sections of our media company and outlet.
That's an incredible example of the tools we have right now at hand to explain complex financial questions. Just to give a little bit of an insight into what goes into these graphs, which are quite beautiful now and user-friendly and intuitive, and you can hover your mouse over them on the website and learn so much more about them. What goes in them is, I mean, thank God for fairly usable software, but a lot of man hours from the reporter and the graphics editor or the graphics specialist who puts them together. We have availability of vast amounts of data, not least by institutions like the European Central Bank, but you need to put in the hard work to make those decipherable. And if you do, I think, as Alessandra said, what we're seeing is that audiences respond so well. So even numbers, in a way, can be scary for people who are not necessarily financial experts, or, you know, last time they did math was at high school. But when they're presented and packaged like this, they can truly make a story sing and make it so much more accessible to the general audience with actually huge impact, because as far as I understand, the Eastern Europe exposure story is not only important for the business of the banks, but also for consumers, right?
Sure.
Lucy, I'm sorry,
So
Michael.
just to jump in on that, there's because I think this is a fascinating area, and it, of course, pictures, visual things make things a lot easier to understand and grasp immediately. And there's a very healthy trend of the big publications hiring data journalists and data visualization experts. There's 2 things I just wanted to mention briefly. One is there's a website which is euro-area-statistics.org, which is created by the ECB and the national central banks of the Euro system, which offers quick and easy access to some of our data. A lot of our data is a bit harder to access somewhere else, but if you go there, it's very simple to use, and it's fully embeddable. And we've seen a number of news organizations around the Euro area actually use that. So it's actually a kind of useful tool. And it's there to be used. And the other thing is a good example, I think, in this area of a public institution rethinking how it presents its own data. And probably an example to others is, it's a UK example, is the Office for National Statistics, which I think is ONS, well, just ons.gov.uk or ONS, I'm not sure. Google it. And they now have a much wider selection of, I think you can pretty much take any of their data, instantly visualize it yourself, and then and it will spit out for you a pre-made chart. Because of course it's great if you work for, I mean, I've noticed that my former employer, the FT, doing a lot of work around this, and they have a bunch of experts on it, and I'm sure the Wall Street Journal does too. But if you're a smaller outfit or a blogger or a one-person show, of course you don't have those resources. So there are a lot of tools out there now that allow everyone really to make use of this.
Yeah, that's brilliant, kind of democratization of data, but it is quite a sensitive and potentially dangerous business interpreting it. So it's, I wanted to get your view on how this is impacting your end of the spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, I loved the example you showed, and I think what's interesting to me as well is. Oh, it's on. It's on. Can you hear me now? Thank you. What's interesting to me is there are a couple of things that are working at the same time as there's all this economic data and different ways of translating and interpreting it, is also there are no secrets anymore. So the Panama Papers, investigative journalism, which of course we must support, and citizen journalism means that we have more and more transparency, either by willing participants of organizations and companies and individuals, or unwilling participants, the Panama Papers as an example. And so recognizing that, one of the things that I talk and write a lot about is institutions and organizations owning the fact that they are visible, that they have more power than ever before, but that with that power comes responsibility, and therefore they must communicate more effectively and be more transparent, because it's a little like a little kid covering his eyes and saying, "You can't see me." I mean, yes, we can. It's you who can't see that the world has changed. And so what's important about that is getting institutions and organizations to recognize, to use Twitter, to do explainers. The explainers are very good, actually. I have used them myself. And I think, getting with the reality of where we are now, and that you'll have more and more people who know less and less still interested and intrigued, and we want them to be. And so, using different ways of translating that information. I think the other thing is the power of drawing these disparate ideas together, which is a lot of what I do, which is, plucking what might not seem obvious, sewing it all together so that people begin to see more what makes sense. And the other thing is, Catherine just tweeted a picture of the panel, and the fact that we have unusually 3 women on a panel about economics. And what that made me think about is actually we need other voices. And we have a panel this afternoon on women in media, plug for the panel. but one of the things to me that's important is that it's not just about women and men, it's about younger voices, older voices, having more voices who speak about, from their perspective, from other perspectives, about what happens, so that there's more chance of people relating to it, and more ideas and more information flow. It's our responsibility. It's not the audience's responsibility to be interested, intrigued, or understanding. It's our job, when we take it upon ourselves, to communicate more effectively and to have more voices. So, more women, more young people, using language that's clear, that relates, things like Snapchat, talking about economics on Snap. I mean, that's our job, using infographics that people can relate to. And I think part of it is, this old-fashioned idea of, well, we put it out there, you read it, you don't read it, it's your responsibility. And that's actually not our job anymore. And, one of the things that I wrote in a column last month was about the importance of investigative journalism. And now the Panama Papers have come out. And, I think it's important and good for all business that we invest in better journalism and better ways of doing things, and it's worth the money to actually find a way to communicate more effectively, because otherwise, what are we doing? And then we write for ourselves. And so recognizing that transparency, making the most of that transparency, finding a way to draw people into the story. I mean, I wrote a lot about FIFA. It was a great means of explaining governance. So corporate governance, that sounds quite boring. Related to something that people know and explain why it means something to them. That's, I hope, I think, more interesting. And, you know, we always joke about the fact that in my area, you know, boards and ethics and so on, when we were kids, I'm not sure if this is a good story to tell out loud, but anyway, when we were kids, you know, you'd open a fortune cookie, and then the joke was you add in bed to the end of everything, so you will have a long life in bed, you know, and you will have great fortune in bed. Well, I do that with boards. There's nothing that happens in the world and that isn't related in some way to boards and governance. Sports governance, bank governance, you know, all of these things. And the minute, you know, everybody sits on boards also, and finding a way for people to understand. If you sit on the school board or you sit on the club board, any board, they're all the same. The cast of characters are the same. There's the long talker, there's the guy who doesn't do any work, there's the sleeper, you know. I mean, and so bringing that room out from behind this closed-doored echo chamber so that people can understand it, that's our responsibility in our various roles. And I think, and my hope is, you know, there are very few, I love this festival so much, by the way, and there are very few sessions. There's a lot of stuff on refugees and a lot of stuff on other topical things, but actually economics and business, this is one of the only panels on that. And I'd love to see more of that because it's not one-dimensional, and it doesn't fit in any one part of the paper, but we need people who are talented and who can explain and discuss and communicate effectively to love the idea of taking on the challenge of explaining and talking about economics and bringing that to people in a way that's interesting and intriguing. So that's my challenge for the room.
And you're all awesome for being here. Alexandra, I think you wanted to weigh in.
I'm glad, Lucy, that you mentioned the gender issue, and I'm wondering, you also mentioned FIFA, if something would be different, if there would have been more women on board, and at the moment it's just a male-dominated business and maybe part of the problem. But when it comes to But when it comes to financial business and reporting on banking in Austria, a few years ago we discovered that in all big media companies and in the Austrian news agency, only women are dealing with these really tough issues, and it's the hardcore stories, and normally a press conference, a bank director surrounded by female journalists. That's the usual picture in Austria. So I think something has changed, and this is good. And maybe may I add one more example, one graph? Can you show it on the screen? It's the gender gap, and we have published it just a few weeks ago. We wanted to show what happened after Cologne. I'm sure you're familiar what was going on there in the New Year's Eve. And we, every 3 months, we publish one edition dealing just with one specific topic, and it's really a success story. So to concentrate on every second page with one specific topic, and it was the relationship between the gender, and this was the graph which we published on 2 pages in the middle, so you can put it out and take it as a poster if you like. And this was one dealing with inequality. So we use different graphs, and it's a lot of extra work, but I think it's worth, and we get a lot of really good feedback on this specific issues and additions. And I'm wondering, Michael, concerning feedback, how many persons are dealing with direct communication which you have mentioned with ordinary citizen in the central bank?
Okay, I didn't have. So the way I work the. Okay, so to give you the way we're set up, there's a Directorate General Communications, which is split into divisions. My division is called Media Relations, so that's not the one. Then there's another one called Outreach, and that does deal with direct communication with citizens. That's where. So I don't know. I don't have the numbers now. So with the caveat that the number I'm going to say might be wrong, but let's say it's about 30 odd people. It's about equivalent numbers of people that we have dealing with. In my division is about 30 people. It's about the same, and that includes the small but very hard-working public inquiries team, who deal with who used to, before we reorganised, they used to sit in my team. So I used to sit next to them. And they do everything from answering the phone to the general public to dealing with letters.
And they get a lot of emotional support.
And it's hard work, and it involves. I mean, we obviously still we have to work very closely together, because clearly we're saying the same thing to everyone. But again, it goes back to the point I made at the beginning. When I used to sit next to them and overhear some of the phone calls coming in, you get a surprising number of people calling up saying, I want to open an account. Well, you can't open an account at the central bank.
I would like to open an account.
Well, become a commercial bank, and the rest
Max
is.
wanted to know how much money you had in the bank.
Sorry, go on.
Go on.
Or not.
Or don't.
No. So yeah. I mean, no. So we have we're putting increasing resources into the direct communications with citizens, because we understand that's clearly very important. Since we're talking about gender as well, I'm also very happy to be very much not on an all-male panel. There's a great Tumblr site called "Congrats, you've got an all-male panel," which is quite amusing. But it's a serious topic, particularly in the area I work in, where unfortunately there are globally central bankers are rather male, and there's not enough
Rather
women.
white and rather middle-aged too.
Well, the
Call them middle-aged.
Life expectancy is
well,
expanding.
the age thing is probably more that you
Seniority.
a seniority issue, and that's why it's a pipeline question. And and what's really needed, you need to be feeding the pipeline. So we need more of our daughters studying economics and wanting to go down this road, and therefore hopefully making and also going into all sorts of other fields and being in finance ministries, and perhaps therefore making better decisions than were made in the last few years.
I'm aware that Alessandra needs to go pretty much on the dot. We have about 10 minutes, and would love to get any thoughts or questions from you guys before we wrap up. Sure, let's start with Catherine. There's a mic, actually. Brilliant. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Catherine Mayer. I'm a journalist, and I'm also very interested in the gender questions here, because I started the UK's first gender equality party, the Women's Equality Party. I wondered on the Standard & Poor's whether there had actually been a gender analysis, as well as it would just be very interesting to know whether that lack of financial literacy was also gendered. And on a wider point about the voices, the need for more voices that Lucy talked about, one of the problems with the way austerity is discussed is that it very rarely takes in what might be considered the feminist economics approach to, there is always an emphasis on cutting jobs and investing in infrastructure, as if the two things were separate. We have as our policy chief, somebody who was one of the women who came into the Icelandic government in the wake of the crash and sorted some things out there. And they took a completely different perspective on how to grow their way back out of the crash. And it was very much looking at a different approach to austerity, saying, yes, cuts need to be made, but actually this sort of rather male focus on infrastructure projects at the expense of jobs doesn't really work. And so that's, I don't know if that's something the panel would like to speak to.
Maybe we'll take the second one and just deal with all of them together. There was someone else somewhere. Cool, thank you.
Hi, I'm Andrea Paternostro, journalist and managing editor, Milano Weekend Daily. I am a former business technology research analyst, interested in visualization data journalism. So, for the standard, when you say you get good feedback, I mean both quality, quantity of feedback, you have metrics for that. What kind of metrics do you consider relevant to get a good feedback?
Thank you. And the young lady back there, thanks so much.
This is a question for Michael. So I work at CNBC in London, and you know, obviously there's, we report on the ECB every meeting, but I'm actually curious as to what you feel the most miscommunicated aspects of either interest rate decisions or monetary policy are just in the broader media.
Great. Any more questions? Brilliant. Well, let's. Is someone someone like to weigh in on the question of male perspectives, masculine perspectives on?
I'll do that one. You're right. I mean, that's fairly, I mean, what is there to disagree with? I mean, though, as someone who sits on the board of an infrastructure company, infrastructure is not just for men. And actually, in the way that we think about infrastructure and what we do with it, we have to think about it in a holistic way as well. And so the point is well taken and also spun around. And I don't know the statistics, so that's an Alexandra question.
Alessandra, I don't know if you have the stats, but also on the feedback on your visualizations and metrics on that stuff.
We have different forms to measure it online, of course. I think you're all familiar with unique clients, visits, and so on. But this is just the quantity. I think it's also important the quality. And I get a lot of direct reader feedback, around 500 emails per day. And I answer them all, and I know when we have one of these special topics that I have to reserve more time for communication with readers. So this is one important feedback channel for us. And when it comes to the print edition, we know, if we sell more, then it's better. And for these special editions, we print more. And this is also a good form of feedback. And I think it's a combination. In general, we try to look not only on visits and unique clients, to have just a look on clickbaits, because we changed our view and we concentrate now more on how long users stay on our web page, how long they read the article. I think that's a more quality approach and a more journalistic way for measuring things.
Just to... Sorry, we're recording, so we have to be...
Okay, very good answers, please. Thank you. You measure benefit on SERP, on your search engine optimization activity, your presence on the results pages on the first page, after a huge work of visualization or after a long form article as the golden inquiry.
Yes, exactly. And long reads work, and you also have a long tail effect. You see weeks later, users still try to find the stories, and they still want to read it. So I think it has a long-term effect, which is for a medium also quite important.
Thanks so much. I just want to say, with the availability of information we have right now about how our stories are faring online, and especially the very brutal statistic that we get about how long people spend reading our stories, especially in financial journalism, I can tell you that these tools and this transparency that we're also receiving are often very upsetting. Because you've really worked very hard on a story that no one's reading, but it is also quite necessary feedback for our work. And I feel it makes us all kind of better informed and better at our jobs. There was a question for Michael, and I think I'd love some final thoughts from him and Lucy. Alessandra needs to dash to her flight, so I think we'll wrap it up on the hour. Thank you.
Okay, so actually, just also very quickly on Catherine's point on austerity, the one thing I'd just very briefly touch on there is that at the end of literally every introductory statement that Mario Draghi reads out at our press conferences, there's a section on he talks about the need for structural reforms, and structural reforms is one of those words that the eyes can glaze over, but behind that sits lots of things, including, for example, investment in skills and education, which is one of the most important ways to sustainably get out of the crisis. Sorry, I didn't catch your name, but Helena. The question on, that's a great question, and I'm probably going to have to give you a non-answer. But I mean, I think one of because any particular thing I pick up on might seem odd, and we do tend to engage with people when we think they've got something factually wrong. But what's really interesting is when you're covering 19 different countries, is the different narratives that happen in each of those countries and the different receptions, so that you can have a policy decision that, for example, goes down in some quarters, say terribly in Germany, and in Spain. So in Germany, the narrative will be it's going far too far. And then say in Spain, I'm just picking countries at random here, the narrative is you're not doing enough. Mm-hmm. So you actually have different things happening in different areas. And one of the challenges of my team is that we have to try and be across that and understand it. And so the thing we focus on is trying to ensure people have at least got the basic facts right. Final thoughts. I think this is I'd second what Lucy said earlier. I think this is an incredibly important area. This is a fantastic festival. I also think I've learnt a lot, and it's really great to see some economics being discussed. So maybe next year, whatever panel it is, won't be at 9 a.m. on Saturday, which is a challenging time. So thank you for all coming. Yeah.
Thank you. I keep forgetting to do that. I guess my final thought is that, first of all, thanks for all the tweets that have been coming in from people who are watching the web stream, and if you're watching this on playback, I feel like the BBC, please do not vote. But also, if you're watching on playback, all of us are on Twitter, and we'd love to keep the conversation going. And one of the ways that I use Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook is actually, I want to know what people care about so that I write about what you care about. And so I hope that you will tell me the things that worry you or that you think are good ideas to write about, not if you're a big company and want me to write about you, but actually if you're an individual who's interested or concerned about something, because I want to know what people want to know. To me, it's a send and receive mechanism, so that that we're writing about the things that you care about. So thank you, by the way, all of you, for being so game about participating. This has worked out well, I think.
Absolutely. And yeah, and by the way, if you're watching this and you have any very exclusive information about financial scandals, you can send them to me. Thanks. As a Southern European, I am proud to say we're finishing exactly on time, which is phenomenal for our region. Thank you so much for your attention. Enjoy the rest of the festival. Cheers. Have a great day.